want to welcome you all tonight for the bestowing of the 31st John William Corrington Award for Literary Excellence. Before we begin, if you could please remember to silence your cell phones. I want to extend my thanks to Centenary President Chris Holloman, our Provost Karen Soule, and the Convocations Committee for their ongoing support. Tonight's event would not be possible without the truly generous support of the Attaway Foundation. I also want to thank the members of the English department, including Emeritus Professor David Havard, who began this award 30 years ago and has for decades been its amazing steward. Thank you to Kate Pedrodi in marketing and Alan Berry in theater for helping make tonight a wonderful experience for everyone. The John William Corrington Award for Literary Excellence is presented annually by the Centenary Department of English to an established writer who has earned the critical esteem of readers. Eudora Welty was the first recipient of the Corrington Award in 1991. Past recipients have included poets Michael Longley, Jericho Brown, and Yosef Komunyakaa, fiction writers Tim O'Brien, Joy Williams, Amy Hemphill, and Percival Everett, and many, many others. The Corrington Award honors a centenary alumnus and English major, Bill Corrington, who was at various times an English professor and attorney, and with his wife Joyce, the head writer for several television series, including Search for Tomorrow and General Hospital. Some of you will know what those are. He was a prolific poet and also published 4 novels, 2 short novels, and 3 collections of short stories. As a screenwriter, Corrington authored such screenplays as The Omega Man, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, and The Killer Bees. He is probably best known as the author of the short novel Decoration Day, thanks to the 1990 film adaptation starring James Garner, Bill Cobbs, Ruby Dee, and Lawrence Fishburne. The award itself takes the form of a bronze medal designed by the internationally exhibited Louisiana sculptor Clyde Connell. I don't know if you can see that. The medal depicts 2 primitive figures, one of them slightly in front of the other and carrying a long object. David has often speculated that the long object is perhaps a writing instrument. I thought perhaps a stick for measuring social distancing. The medal is presented in a stunning wood and leather box crafted by another member of the English department, Steve Shelburne. This is amazing. I am so excited to be here. Tonight's event has been more than 2 years in the making, and for me, it has truly been 15 years in the making. I actually had the chance to meet this year's recipient, Ruth Ozeki, before I had the pleasure of discovering her work. In 2006, I was a fairly new assistant professor at Centenary, and I was attending a meeting of the Society for Literature, Art, and Science in Amsterdam. And it was there that I had the great fortune to meet Ruth. She and Penn State professor Susan Squire were co-presenting about agricultural studies. They were talking about chickens. Fancy chickens, if I recall correctly. Anyway, Ruth was sitting cross-legged on a table laughing and telling stories. Folks were crowded around to absorb her joy and good humor. And I like to think that I entertained her a tiny bit with a tale of the famous fainting roosters of Denizli, Turkey, where I had just been visiting. Really, the roosters who crow so vigorously and with such ambition that they pass out. May we all be so ambitious. Ruth Ozeki is the author of 4 novels, My Year of Meats, about meat, Oliver Creation, which is about potatoes, A Tale for the Time Being, which our students are reading this semester. Her newest novel, The Book of Form and Emptiness, was just released this fall. She is the author of a non-fictional memoir, The Face, A Time Code. And Ozeki's writing has appeared in the New York Times and in a number of anthologies. Awards for her fiction and films, because she's also a filmmaker, have earned numerous accolades, including the LA Times Book Prize, the Dos Passos Prize, and the American Book Award. A Tale for the Time Being was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. The list of honors just goes on and on. Ruth Ozeki's work is difficult to describe, which is itself a hallmark of literary excellence, so says T.S. Eliot. Critics have called her novels postmodernist, metafiction, autofiction, magical realist, all true. But these descriptors don't get at the particular way that her novels work, drawing on messy constellations of interconnection and coincidence. Entanglements, I think is the right word, that only really get going when the reader commits to becoming a collaborator with Ruth. I was reminded again, teaching A Tale for the Time Being, that the usual interpretive strategies for her works don't work. Ozeki's novels require something more like unfolding rather than interpretation. Steve Shelburne put it better when he said that you have to let the book teach you how to read it. And this captures perfectly Ozeki's complex, layered, polyvocal, rhizomatic approach to narrative, which demands the reader's collaboration. But that collaboration is also richly rewarded, as now promises her reader in A Tale for the Time Being, together we'll make magic. So I hope tonight we will all eagerly embrace our roles as readers, appreciate that after a long wait we finally get to entangle our thoughts briefly and in person, and together some magic with tonight's honored guest and Corrington Award winner, Ruth Ozeki.
So beautiful. Seriously, an English professor made this box? Oh my God, this is incredible. It is so beautiful. And this metal is amazing. I think everybody should come and see it, but maybe we can't. I'll hold it up. You can't really see it, but it is absolutely beautiful. Wow. I really am I'm so moved and honored. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. It's just beautiful. All right, I'll try to do it justice. That was it was a couple things were going through my head when you were introducing me, and one was this the titles of Corrington's screenplays, right? And I realized this is something that he and I have in common, right? His was like Killer Bees, you said, and and then Return to the Planet of the Apes, which is a fantastic movie. And when I first started out, in the creative fields, I kind of stumbled. It was really by accident more than anything else into filmmaking. I needed a job. I had a degree in classical Japanese literature. Obviously there's not a huge market for people with a background like that in New York City at the time. And so I was in New York, and I got a job as an art director of and it was a very, very low budget production company called Tyson Films. And they hired me as the art director. I'd never set foot on a film set before. And the movie was called Matt Riker Mutant Hunt. Okay. And, and so I sat around, and did the pre-production meetings with the director and the rest of the crew. And about 3 days or so, 4 days before the shoot was supposed to start, the director suddenly was like, "Oh my, we don't have an art director, right?" Oh, that's right. They had hired me to do sketches, right? To do just to do storyboards, right? And suddenly he thought, "Oh, we don't have an art director." And he looked around, and I was the only person who wasn't doing anything. And he pointed at me and said, "You be the art director." And so that was my introduction to film. And I did a whole series of films: Matt Riker Mutant Hunt, Breeders, Necropolis, Robot Holocaust, right? And these were, so I think it's actually appropriate that I, am getting this award because, there's a genre similarity here, right? I really, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to be, someplace, actually physically being in a place that I haven't been in for 2 years. That's wonderful. But today I was so moved by the students and meeting you guys and talking to you about the book and about the reading that you've been doing. And I could tell, as Jean mentioned, I really believe that reading is a collaborative, it's a collaborative endeavor. We do it together. So my part is, is to write the book, right? And I do that over a, painfully long period of time. And then I send the book out into the world, and, and you pick it up and you read it. And so we talk about it, as a book in the singular, but actually by the time it goes out into the world and you all pick it up and you read it, we're all in a kind of collaboration, and you bring your own lived experience to the reading, and you co-create with me a brand new book, a different book, a book that is completely unique, that no one else has ever read before. And that's the exciting part, I think, of especially novel writing. It's even though we talk about it as a book in the singular, it's actually more like a multiverse, right? There's a quantum effect here. And so it's one book, but it's also, a huge array of books, and each one is completely unique. And I think this is why I really think that there's no right way to read a book, and maybe when you were studying English in elementary school and in junior high school, you got the impression that there was a right way to read the book, and that your teacher knew that right way, and that your teacher was kind of like dangling in front of you, and you were trying to get the right answer. And I really don't think that's actually the case. I think that it's a creative activity, and the reader is the co-creator. So it's a dialogue, right? It's a dialogue. And that to me is it's exciting. That's where the magic, that's really the magic occurs. So today I thought I would, do some reading for you. And that's partly selfish. It's partly because I really love reading aloud. But it's also because when I was a kid, I loved being read to. And I hope you all had that experience when you were a child. And so what I'd like to ask you to do is just kind of get comfortable, right? And maybe pretend you're a little kid again. And I thought I would read, I'd start with A Tale for the Time Being, since that's the book that you all read. But then I thought I would just read a little bit of the new book as well. The other reason I like to read is because, to my mind, novels, fiction, is all about voice, right? And when I write, the novel, the book comes to me as a voice. And sometimes that's the voice of a character, but oftentimes it's the voice of the book itself, right? And so there's a sense of, there's a tone to the book that, that I start to hear, and very often it is the character's voice, but I start to hear that, and something about it kind of catches my interest, and I write it down. So in this case, for A Tale for the Time Being, the first voice that I heard was the voice of the protagonist, Nao Yasutani. And this was probably back in 2006, probably right around the time that we were talking about fainting chickens. And I just have to tell you, too, small digression here. I went down such a rabbit hole after I went back from Amsterdam. I started researching fainting chickens. I spent like weeks just, Googling and researching fainting chickens. So thank you for that. Yeah. I'm actually surprised that there aren't fainting chickens in this book, So in 2006, around that time, the voice of this girl, Nao Yasutani, came to me, and I knew a couple of things about her when I heard this voice. I knew that she was a Japanese schoolgirl. I knew that she was living in Tokyo, and so let me just read a little bit of what I heard her say. Hi, my name is Nao, and I'm a time being. Do you know what a time being is? Well, if you give me a moment, I will tell you. A time being is someone who lives in time, and that means you and me and every one of us who is or was or ever will be. As for me, right now, I'm sitting in a French maid cafe in Akiba Electricity Town, listening to a sad chanson that's playing sometime in your past, which is also my present, writing this and wondering about you, somewhere in my future. And if you're reading this, then maybe by now you're wondering about me too. You wonder about me. I wonder about you. Who are you, and what are you doing? Are you in a New York subway car hanging from a strap, or soaking in your hot tub in Sunnyvale? Are you sunbathing on a sandy beach in Phuket, or having your toenails buffed in Abu Dhabi? Are you a male, or a female, or somewhere in between? Is your girlfriend cooking you a yummy dinner, or are you eating cold Chinese noodles from a box? Are you curled up with your back turned coldly towards your snoring wife, or are you eagerly waiting for your beautiful lover to finish his bath so you can make passionate love to him? Do you have a cat, and is she sitting on your lap? Does her forehead smell like cedar trees and fresh, sweet air? Actually, it doesn't matter very much, because by the time you read this, everything will be different, and you will be nowhere in particular, flipping idly through the pages of this book, which happens to be the diary of my last days on Earth, wondering if you should keep on reading. And if you decide not to read anymore, hey, no problem, because you're not the one I was waiting for anyway. But if you do decide to read on, then guess what? You're my kind of time being, and together we'll make magic. Okay, so that was, more or less the kind of, what I heard back in 2006. And as soon as I heard her voice speaking to me, I knew certain things about her. I knew that she was a junior high school student living in Tokyo. I knew that she was troubled, possibly suicidal. But at the same time, she had a kind of, she had an attitude about her, right? And she had a sense of humor. She was writing in her diary, which was odd because, usually, and she was writing in English, which struck me as odd because I knew she was in Japan. And I also got the feeling that she was writing to somebody. She was addressing somebody, right? A you. In her diary, which is kind of odd, right? Because usually when you're writing a diary, you're writing it for yourself. So in this case, it was really clear to me that she was writing it to somebody. But the problem was she didn't really know who she was writing to, right? And so therefore, neither did I. So at that point, as a novelist, it's my job to figure it out. Who is Nao Yasutani writing to? And so it took me about 5 years to do this. And today in class, I described a little bit about what this was like in the various classes. But in any case, it took me about 5 years to figure this out. I went through all sorts of experiments and various things. At the end of this, I discovered, much to my surprise, that Nao's reader was a novelist. And in fact, she was a novelist named Ruth. Okay, so, that's kind of a coincidence, right? And so I was really surprised to figure this out. So let me read a little bit of Ruth's first section here so that you can, again, it's all about voice, right? So you can kind of hear what Ruth's section sounds like to me. A tiny sparkle caught Ruth's eye, a small glint of refracted sunlight angling out from beneath a massive tangle of drying bull kelp, which the sea had heaved up onto the sand at full tide. She mistook it for the sheen of a dying jellyfish and almost walked right by it. The beaches were overrun with jellyfish these days, the monstrous red stinging kind that looked like wounds along the shoreline. But something made her stop. She leaned over and nudged the heap of kelp with the toe of her sneaker and then poked it with a stick. Untangling the whip-like fronds, she dislodged enough to see that what glistened underneath was not a dying sea jelly, but something plastic, a bag. Not surprising, the ocean was full of plastic. She dug a bit more until she could lift the bag up by its corner. It was heavier than she expected, a scarred plastic freezer bag encrusted with barnacles that spread across its surface like a rash. It must have been in the ocean for a long time, she thought. Inside the bag, she could see a hint of something red. Someone's garbage, no doubt, tossed overboard or left behind after a picnic or a rave. The sea was always heaving things up and hurling them back. Fishing lines, floats, beer cans, plastic toys, tampons, Nike sneakers. A few years earlier, it was severed feet. People were finding them up and down Vancouver Island, washed up on the sand. One had been found on this very beach. No one could explain what happened to the rest of the bodies. Ruth didn't want to think about what might be rotting inside the bag. She flung it further up the beach. She would finish her walk and then pick it up on the way back, take it home, and throw it out. You can see a little bit of the horror film influence kind of creeping in there. Okay, so needless to say, Ruth does not throw it out. I mean, if she did throw it out, then there wouldn't be a book, right? So she doesn't throw it out. Instead, she takes it home and leaves it on the porch where her husband, Oliver, finds it. And here's another coincidence, is that I'm also married to somebody named Oliver, right? So the coincidences are really starting to mount here. He had smoothed the bags flat, laid them out on top of one another in descending order of size, and then sorted the contents into 3 neat collections: a small stack of handwritten letters, a pudgy bound book with a faded red cover, a sturdy antique wristwatch with a matte black face and a luminous dial. Next to these sat the Hello Kitty lunchbox that had protected the contents from the corrosive effects of the sea. The cat was sniffing at the lunchbox. Ruth picked him up and dropped him on the floor, and then turned her attention to the items on the table. The letters appeared to be written in Japanese. The cover of the red book was printed in French. The watch had markings etched onto the back, which were difficult to decipher, so Oliver had taken out his iPhone and was using the microscope app to examine the engraving. "I think this is Japanese too," he said. Ruth flipped through the letters, trying to make out the characters that were written in a faded blue ink. "The handwriting's old and cursive, beautiful, but I can't understand a word of it." She put the letters down and took the watch from him. "Yes," she said, "they're Japanese numbers, not a date though. 47387, 47387. Maybe a serial number?" She held the watch up to her ear and listened for the ticking, but it was broken. She put it down and picked up the bright red lunchbox. The red color showing through the scarred plastic was what had led her to mistake the freezer bag for a stinging jellyfish. How long had it been floating out there in the ocean before washing up? The lunchbox lid had a rubber gasket around the rim. She picked up the book, which was surprisingly dry, the cloth cover soft and worn, its corners blunt from rough handling. She put the edge to her nose and inhaled the musty scent of mildewed pages and dust. She looked at the tarnished gilt title, embossed on the red cloth spine. "À la recherche du temps perdu," she wrote, by Marcel Proust. Her French wasn't great, but she opened the cover anyway, curious to see if she could understand just the first few lines. She was expecting to see an age-stained folio printed in an antique font, so she was entirely unprepared for the adolescent purple handwriting that sprawled across the page. It felt like a desecration, and it shocked her so much she almost dropped the book. "Hi," she read. "My name is Now, and I'm a time being. Do you know what a time being is?" Okay, so it kind of brings it full circle there, and what Ruth has discovered here is Now's diary, hidden in the hacked version of Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu, the In Search of Lost Time. And Ruth just makes the assumption that the diary is debris from the 2011 tsunami. And she starts to read the diary and becomes obsessed with Now's life and discovering her fate. I was talking about this a little bit in class today too. The the obsession that Ruth, the character, sort of starts to feel is quite a bit like the obsession that Ruth, the writer, started to feel as well. We were on parallel tracks here because we were both trying to figure out what had happened to Nao Yasutani, right? And so it was kind of like reality was paralleling fiction for about 8 years while I was writing this. Okay, so Nao's story, as you know, she grew up in Sunnyvale, California. Her father was a computer programmer. He lost his job, mysterious reasons, and they moved back to Japan. Nao is then sent to junior high school, and she's being bullied, terribly bullied in high school. So much, she was suffering so much that she had decided that she was going to kill herself. But before she committed suicide, she wanted to do one last final act of redemption, and that was to tell the life story of her great-grandmother, old Jiko, who is a 104-year-old Zen Buddhist nun. But she's not just any 104-year-old Zen Buddhist nun. She's a 104-year-old anarchist feminist Zen Buddhist nun. And so I want to read a scene that takes place when Nao is visiting old Jiko's temple and during her summer vacation. And this is up in northern Japan, in Sendai. And there's a little talk here about Nao mentions her superpower. Okay, superpower, which is the Japanese way you would pronounce superpower, right? And what she's talking about here is the power of Zen meditation, okay, which her great-grandmother has taught her. And I also, a couple of other things. This is a kind of content warning. If anybody speaks Japanese here, there's some kind of bad language, but if you don't speak Japanese, you don't have to worry about it. Then the other thing I just wanted to mention is that I wrote this scene long before the earthquake and tsunami, before the tidal wave in Japan. And when I wrote this scene, the word wave did not mean a tidal wave. It was not a deadly force of nature, which it soon became. Okay. Have you ever tried to bully a wave? Punch it, kick it, pinch it, hit it, beat it to death with a stick? Stupid. After old Jiko found my scars, she took me on an errand into town. On the way back, she wanted to stop and buy some rice balls and soft drinks and some chocolate treats. She had this idea that we could take the bus to the seaside and have a picnic there. I didn't particularly care, but she seemed to think it would be a big treat for me to eat store-bought food and play by the ocean, so I was like, whatever, willing to go along, because it's hard to disappoint someone who's 104 years old. Because of her cataracts, Jiko can't really walk very well, and she always carries a stick. But what she really likes, is when you hold hands with her. I think holding hands makes her feel more confident, and so I got into the habit of holding her hand when I was next to her. And to tell you the truth, I liked it too. I liked the feeling of her thin little fingers in mine. I liked being the strong one and keeping her tiny body close to me. It made me feel useful. When I wasn't there, she used her stick. I liked feeling more useful than a stick. Before getting on the bus to the seaside, Jiko wanted to stop at the Family Mart in town to buy a picnic, but there happened to be a gang of Yankee girls hanging out in the parking lot in front, so I lied and said I wasn't hungry. They were Speed Tribe biker chicks with bleached orange and yellow shaggy hair and baggy construction worker pants and big flapping lab coats that looked like the kind that doctors and scientists wear, only they weren't white. They were neon bright and graffitied all over with giant black kanji. The girls were squatting on the pavement by the door, chewing gum and smoking. A couple of them were leaning on wooden swords, the kind you use for kendo, and I was like, no way, Grandma, I'm really not hungry. But old Jiko had her heart set on making a picnic for me, so what could I do? I held her little hand real tight, and when we got near the girls, one of them spat, and it landed at our feet. and then they started to say stuff. It was nothing I hadn't heard at school before, but it shocked me because of Jiko being so old. And how can you say rude stuff about Manko and Chin to an old lady who's a nun? It took us forever to get past them because Jiko walked so slow, and they were kind of blocking our way. They kept on shouting out and spitting, and I could feel my heart racing and my face growing hot, even if old Jiko didn't bat an eyelid. Finally, we made it into the family mart. The whole time we were looking for rice balls and drinks and deciding whether to buy chocolate or sweet bean cakes or both for dessert, I kept looking through the window at the girls squatting outside the store. I knew that when we left, they would say more stuff to us. Maybe they would throw things at us or trip us. Maybe they would follow us to the beach and get their boyfriends to rape us and beat us and throw our dead bodies into the ocean. Or maybe they would just do the business themselves with their wooden swords. I'd gotten plenty of practice at school imagining this kind of thing happening to my own body, so it didn't bother me that much. But the idea of someone hurting my old Jiko was brand new to my mind, and it made me feel like throwing up. But old Jiko wasn't paying any attention. She was concentrating on selecting the flavors of our rice balls, and eventually she decided on sour plums, flavored seaweed, and spicy cod roe. She wanted me to choose a chocolate treat, either Pocky or Melty Kisses, but how could I focus on something so unimportant? I had to protect us from our enemies outside the door, even if she was too old and blind to comprehend the danger we were in, and I was trying to calculate my chances of fighting off a dozen Yankee bitches with serious sticks when all I had was my pathetic little superpower. It took forever for Jiko to pay the cashier. You know how it is with old people and their coin purses. But I didn't mind or offer to help. I was kind of hoping that maybe she would take all day, and by the time we'd finished, the gang would have gone, but no such luck. They were still there, squatting on the pavement, and the minute we walked out of the store, they kind of locked onto us, spitting and sizing us up. I tried to hurry Jiko past them, but you know old Jiko, she always takes her time. The girls started calling out, and as we got closer, their cries grew louder and more screechy, and a couple of the squatting ones got to their feet. I moved in front, but when we were even with them, suddenly old Jiko stopped. She turned to face them, peering as if she was noticing them for the first time, and then she tugged on my hand and started shuffling in their direction. I held back, whispering, "Dame da yo, oba-chama, ikou yo." But she didn't listen. She went up and stood right in front of them and gave them a long look, which is how she looks at everything, long and steady, probably on account of the time it takes for an image to form through the milky lenses of her cataracts. The girls in their neon-colored pants and blue and orange and red mechanical coats with the big black kanji must have been just a confusion of lines and bright colors to her eyes. No one said anything. The girls were jutting out their chins and hips and shifting restlessly from side to side. Finally, I guess old Jiko understood what she was looking at. She dropped my hand, and I held my breath. And then she bowed. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't a little bow either. It was a deep bow. The girls were like, "What the fuck?" One of them, a fat girl sitting in front, kind of nodded back. Not quite a bow, not completely respectful, but not a punch in the face either. But then the tall one in the middle, who is clearly the girl boss, reached over and gave the fat one a swift punch in the head. "Namaten no ka?" she snarled. "Chuto hanpa nanda yo? Chanto ojigi mo dekinai no ka?" She smacked the fat girl once more, and then she stood up straight, put her palms together, and bowed deeply from the waist. The rest of her crew jumped up and did the same. Jiko bowed to them again and nudged me. So I bowed too, but I did it half-assed, so she made me do it again, which made things even because now it was like old Jiko was the girl boss of our gang, and I was the fat screw-up who couldn't bow properly. I didn't think it was so funny, but the gangbangers thought it was hilarious, and Jiko smiled too, and then she took my hand and we walked on. When the bus came, Jiko sat by the window and looked back at the parking lot. I wonder what omatsuri it is today, she said. Omatsuri? Festival? Yes, she said. Those pretty young people dressed up in their festival clothes. They look so gay. I wonder what the occasion is. It's not a festival. Those were gangbangers, Granny, biker chicks, Yankee girls. They were girls? Bad girls, juvenile delinquents. They were saying stuff. I thought they were going to beat us up. Oh, no, Jiko said, shaking her head. They were all dressed so nicely. Such cheerful colors. 2. Have you ever bullied a wave? Jiko asked me at the beach. We had eaten rice balls and chocolate and were hanging out. Jiko was sitting on a small wooden bench and I was lying on the sand at her feet. The sun was beating down. Jiko had tied a damp white hand towel around her bald head and seemed as cool as a cucumber in her gray pajamas. I was hot and sweaty and feeling restless, but I hadn't brought a bathing suit and didn't really want to go for a swim. But that's not what she was talking about. Bullied a wave? I repeated. No, of course not. Try it. Go to the water and wait for the biggest wave and give it a punch. Give it a good kick. Hit with a stick. Go on. I will watch. She handed me her walking stick. There was no one around except for a couple of surfers way down the beach. I took old Jiko's stick in my hand and walked and then ran to the edge of the ocean, waving it around my head like a kendo sword. The waves were big, breaking on the beach, and I ran into the first one that came at me, yelling, "Kiai!" like a samurai going into battle. I smacked the wave with the stick, cutting through it, but the water kept coming. I ran back up the beach and escaped, but the next one knocked me over. I got to my feet and attacked again and again, and each time the water crashed down on top of me, grinding me against the rock and covering me with foam and sand. I didn't mind. The sharp cold felt good, and the violence of the waves felt powerful and real, and the bitterness of salt in my nose tasted harshly delicious. Over and over, I ran at the sea, beating it until I was so tired I could barely stand. And then the next time I fell down, I just lay there and let the waves wash over me. And I wondered, what would happen if I stopped trying to get up? Just let my body go. Would I be washed out to sea? The sharks would eat my limbs and organs. Little fish would feed on my fingertips. My beautiful white bones would fall to the bottom of the ocean where anemones would grow upon them like flowers. Pearls would rest in my eye sockets. I stood and walked back to where old Jiko was sitting. She took the small towel from her head and handed it to me. "Maketa," I said, throwing myself on the sand. I lost. The ocean won. She smiled. "Was it good feeling?" I said. "Well, that's good," she said. "Have another rice ball." 3. We sat there for a while longer, waiting for my shorts and t-shirt to dry. Down the beach in the distance, the surfers kept falling into the water and disappearing. "The waves keep beating them up too," I said, pointing. Jiko squinted, but she couldn't see them through her cataracts. "There," I said. "See that one? He's just standing up. He's up. He's up. Oh, no, he's down." I laughed. It was funny to watch. Jiko nodded like she was agreeing with me. "Up, down, same thing," she said. Now that's a typical Jiko comment, all about pointing to what she calls the not to nature of existence when I'm just trying to watch some cute guys surfing. I know better than to argue with her because she always wins, but it's like a knock-knock joke where you have to say who's there so the other person can tell you the punchline. So I said, "No, it's not the same thing, not for the surfer." "Yes," she said, "you are right. Not the same." She adjusted her glasses. "Not different either." See what I mean? It is different, Granny. The whole point of surfing is to stand on top of the wave, not underneath it. Safa, wave. Same thing. I don't know why I bother. That's just stupid, I said. A surfer's a person. A wave is a wave. How can they be the same? Jiko looked out across the ocean to where the water met the sky. A wave is born from deep conditions of the ocean. A possum is born from deep conditions of the world. A possum pokes up from the world and rolls along like a wave until it is time to sink down again. Up, down, possum, wave. She pointed to the steep cliffs along the shoreline. Jiko, mountain, same thing. The mountain is tall and will live a long time. Jiko is small and will not live much longer. Like I said, this is pretty typical of the kind of conversation you have with my old Jiko. I never completely understand what she's saying, but I like that she tries to explain it to me anyway. It's nice of her. It was time to go back to the temple. My shorts and t-shirt had dried out, and my skin was super itchy from the salt. I helped Jiko to her feet, and we walked back to the bus stop together, holding hands again. I was still thinking about what she said about waves, and it made me sad because I knew that her little wave was not going to last, and soon she would join the sea again. And even though I know you can't hold on to water, still I gripped her fingers a little more tightly to keep her from leaking away. Thank you. Thank you. So, oh good, okay. So I just wanted to, as I mentioned, there was a lot of struggle involved in writing this book. And I won't go into the details of it, but because I talked about it a little bit today in class to other people, to the students. But basically what happened was that I had completed a draft of this book in 2011, and then the earthquake and tsunami happened. And I suddenly realized, well, I knew one thing. I knew that the draft that I'd completed was not very good. And it was very different from the draft that I ended up with. The reader character was was a single person who was living in a kind of unspecified urban city, kind of like Vancouver, who spent most of his time in a library, right? Hanging out with a group of people who kind of lived in the library, like the denizens of the library. So Ruth and Oliver were not a part of the story. It was just, it was very different. And then the earthquake and tsunami happened, and I realized that this draft just was not going to work, not in this new context of the world that had really been kind of broken by the events, the earthquake and the tsunami, and certainly the meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear power plants. And so I knew that I needed to do something radical. And I felt that Now's section, Now's diary, was working quite well. The problem was the reader, right? And so I had a manuscript of about 500 and some odd pages at that point. And what I ended up doing, it was all interleaved chapters. And I ended up taking the manuscript and unzipping it and throwing out about 250, 300 pages and putting those in a file in my on my hard drive. And then that's when I had the idea, with Oliver's help, of Oliver had pointed out that the earthquake and tsunami had kind of broken the world, and it had certainly broken the fictional world of my book, and that the only way to continue with the book was to allow the world to continue to be broken. And the way that you would do that, because it's a fiction, the way you could continue to kind of, honor the brokenness is to allow some kind of reality into the fiction. And so Oliver's idea was, he said, Ruth, you need to step in to the book, as Now's reader. You need to be the one who finds the diary, and you need to, to respond and to fill that role. And I thought about it, and I realized he was absolutely right, because that would a reader would read it and always wonder, right, is this fiction, is this real, right, because Ruth, the writer, and Ruth, the fictional character, were the same. And I thought this was a great idea, and I thanked Oliver for this, and I said, fine, I'll do it. I'll step in, I'll be the character in the book, but if I'm going to be in the book, you have to be in the book too. And thank goodness he agreed. He's a good sport. So in any case, did that, and then it took me about 5 months to finish the book at that point. Once I had this last, piece of, in place, suddenly it was just, the whole thing came together really, really fast. And I have to say, it was probably one of the most rewarding and certainly one of the fastest writing experiences of my life. Would that they were all that easy. But in any case, so then what happened is that this 250, 300 pages is sitting in my folder, in a folder called dump, on my hard drive. And it's almost like the characters just did not want to die. They did not want to stay in that folder, in that dump folder. And the location of the library, too, just kept coming back. It kept haunting me. And in the midst of this, I had an idea, sort of over here. So here's the folder with the library and stuff like that. And over on this side of my brain, I suddenly had this idea of a boy, a young boy, who hears the voices of things speaking to him, right? And I started thinking, and I started thinking about him in much in the same way that Nao Yasutani had kind of come to me. I started to think about this boy and to think about, about his predicament. And it occurred to me that, in this world that we live in now, the world is a very noisy place, and there's a lot of voices that we're listening to all the time. And it struck me that for a boy like that, the library would be exactly the place where he could go to find some kind of refuge. Because, of course, libraries are quiet places. They're filled with things that speak to us. Books speak to us, after all, and they're objects. But in a library, the books are all, they're all neatly lined up. They know their places, and they speak in their quiet library voices, right? So for a boy who's has this kind of sensitivity to sound, the library would be a good place for him to go. So, in any case, these two ideas, sort of came together and started to kind of move and constellate, and that's where the Book of Form and Emptiness comes from, okay? And what I'd like to do is just read the very, very beginning of this book, because I really think the two books are, they're not siblings exactly. They're more like cousins. Okay, both of them have. Let's see now. Both of them have Zen nuns in them. Okay, both of them, in the way that A Tale for the Time Being was kind of centered around a Zen teaching about time. This book, the Book of Form and Emptiness, is kind of centered or constellates around a Zen koan or question about space, right? About space and about things. And the koan is, do insentient beings speak the Dharma? Okay, in other words, do insentient beings have Buddha nature? Can insentient beings, like objects, things, right? Trees, plants, can they teach us? Can they be our teachers, right? And so, these are the kinds of similarities between the two books. And so I thought I would just read you just a little bit of the beginning, just to kind of bring it around and give you a sense of what this book sounds like, because it's a book all about voices again. And I should also mention that, so it's a book about things that speak, right? And the narrator of this book, the Book of Form and Emptiness, is the Book of Form and Emptiness, okay? It's the book itself that's narrating itself into being, okay? So when you hear the voice of the narrator, that is the book. In the beginning, a book must start somewhere. One brave letter must volunteer to go first, laying itself on the line in an act of faith from which a word takes heart and follows, drawing a sentence into its wake. From there, a paragraph amasses, and soon a page, and the book is on its way, finding a voice, calling itself into being. A book must start somewhere, and this one starts here. A boy. Shh, listen. That's my book, and it's talking to you. Can you hear it? It's okay if you can't, though. It's not your fault. Things speak all the time, but if your ears aren't attuned, you have to learn to listen. You can start by using your eyes, because eyes are easy. Look at all the things around you. What do you see? A book, obviously. And obviously the book is speaking to you, so try something more challenging. The chair you're sitting on, the pencil in your pocket, the sneaker on your foot. Still can't hear? Then get down on your knees and put your head to the seat, or take off your shoe and hold it to your ear. No, wait. If there are people around, they'll think you're mad, so try it with the pencil first. Pencils have stories inside them, and they're safe as long as you don't stick the point in your ear. Just hold it next to your head and listen. Can you hear the wood whisper? The ghost of the pine? The mutter of lead? Sometimes it's more than one voice. Sometimes it's a whole chorus of voices rising from a single thing, especially if it's a made thing with lots of different makers. But don't be scared. I think it depends on the kind of day they were having back in Guangdong or Laos or wherever. And if it was a good day at the old sweatshop, if they were enjoying a pleasant thought at the moment when that particular grommet came tumbling down the line and passed through their fingers, then that pleasant thought will cling to the whole. Sometimes it's not so much a thought as a feeling, a nice warm feeling, like love, for example, sunny and yellow. But when it's a sad feeling or an angry one that gets laced into your shoe, then you better watch out, because that shoe might do crazy shit, like marching your feet right up to the front of the Nike store, for example, where you could wind up smashing the display window with a baseball bat made of furious wood. If that happens, it's still not your fault. Just apologize to the window, say I'm sorry to the glass, and whatever you do, don't try to explain. The arresting officer doesn't care about the crappy conditions in the bat factory. He won't care about the chainsaws or the sturdy ash tree that the bat used to be, so just keep your mouth shut. Stay calm, be polite, remember to breathe. It's really important not to get upset, because then the voices will get the upper hand and take over your mind. Things are needy. They take up space. They want attention, and they'll drive you mad if you let them. So just remember, you're like the air traffic controller. No, wait. You're like the leader of a big brass band made up of all the jazzy stuff of the planet, and you're floating out there in space, standing on this great garbage heap of a world with your hair slicked back and your natty suit and your stick up in the air, surrounded by all the eager things. And for one quick, beautiful moment, all their voices go silent, waiting till you bring your baton down. Music or madness? It's totally up to you. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a joy to be here. Thank you.